So welcome to our session, Revising Our Advising. What should we say to people wanting a career in archaeology? Before we get started with the main discussion of this session, we just wanted to go over a few housekeeping rules. And that's namely, please do keep your microphones off to avoid background noise. Please do feel free to add comments and questions to the chat. Some of you will know I love Jamboards. We do have a Jamboard for this session, and I'll be sharing that a bit later in the session. But we've got plenty of options basically for you to share your thoughts. We will do our best to pick up the questions, but do bear with us if we don't see them immediately. Please be mindful of our digital event harassment policy, and that's available on our website. But ultimately, please just be respectful to each other when we're discussing these issues. I think there has the potential to, for us all to express some quite passionate views about this topic, and quite rightly so. But just remember that we can have this discussion and have this critique in a respectful manner. As you will see, our session is being recorded, and the recording will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel shortly, in the next, I think hopefully in the next few days or so. But if there are any issues or questions or queries about the recording, please just get in touch with us at conference@archaeologist.net. And again, if you experience any issues during the session, if there's anything you want to discuss, we're here to help and we're here to have that discussion. So please do just get in touch with us and we'll work out a workaround. So what are we here to discuss? Well, ultimately, this session is not about career advice. This session is about how we give career advice. And I think we were really, really keen to sort of start to look critically at how the sector commonly gives career advice. And particularly, I think sometimes when we observe some interesting nuggets of information that some of our colleagues and peers share that aren't always helpful and relevant to our early career colleagues. So this session is going to be about hearing from our early career colleagues and learning how changing times should impact on our career advice. And with that, the barriers, the additional barriers, the constraints and the issues that we likely didn't face that our early career colleagues are experiencing today. This session is also going to learn about projects which are exploring these elements in more detail and how we can potentially change the way that we're promoting careers in archaeology. So we're really hoping to explore the barriers promoting that sometimes are sometimes promoted as good career advice. We're really keen to explore the key messaging with career advice mapped against the current realities of studying and starting out in archaeology. And we also really want to discuss how changing up our career advice could potentially help with recruiting and crucially retaining staff in our profession, because we want people to join our profession and we want to work together to make it a great profession for everyone. So, as I say, we're going to, this is an open session. We've got lots of time for discussion, and we really do want to hear your thoughts in the audience about what we should be doing differently. After this, I've stopped sharing screen. I'm going to be sharing a link to a Jamboard. And there, if you don't feel comfortable sharing your thoughts out loud during the session, you can add your thoughts anonymously online to the Jamboard, and they can all be taken into consideration. We're really keen to hear of advice that has been really helpful to you and advice that hasn't been so helpful for you. We also really want to work out what to do with this information in the session. It's all very well spending the next 2 hours talking about these issues, but how can we share the learning points further than the people in this Zoom room? So we're keen to discuss with you what that output could be. Is it a resource sheet, or is there something more dynamic that we can do to make sure everyone is giving great career advice? So please do listen, please reflect on how you give career advice. Please consider how this conversation can change the way that you give career advice. And please consider how you could be an agent of change with this element of our practice and our profession. How can you ensure that we're giving the best advice ever? I don't know if that's a bit of a golden goose there, the best advice ever. But first up, we are going to hear from Mike Dupree and Sakshi Sharana, who are going to be talking about rethinking career advice. So I'm going to hand over to Mike and Sakshi, and let's hear about your presentation.
All right. Hi, everyone. Let me just share my screen here really quickly. All right. Can everyone see all right? Okay, great.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Sorry, let me just turn off closed captioning. So my name's Michael Dupree. I am currently the chair of the advisory council, and I'm also on the early careers committee of CIFA, as well as a trustee of the CBA and CBA London, and I'm on 4 other special interest groups of CIFA, as well as working at Archaeology Southeast and UCL as a digital archaeology specialist, and just finishing up my PhD. Today I'm going to kick off this discussion about rethinking career advice. And a lot of this discussion that Sakshi and I developed at the start here is based off of our own experiences, but also based off of a lot of work that we've done with the early careers group, setting up advice workshops, career panels, different opportunities for people to give advice. As well as my own PhD, which included talking to a lot of archaeologists and understanding the way archaeology is working right now. So a lot of what we've come up with might be a little bit difficult to, it might sound like kind of aggressive advice, depending on your background, because the first thing I want to talk about is that life changes. And in archaeology, we've seen life change pretty dramatically in the past few years. We have seen increased degree requirements, increased responsibilities and skill sets, and increased burdens and limitations on people seeking jobs and trying to join the job market. And we've seen these major periods of change before in archaeology. Back in the 90s, we saw PPG 16, which has completely changed British archaeology. 2008, we saw the financial crisis change the world around us and the way we do archaeology, how archaeologists get jobs, how much they get paid. And the same with the COVID pandemic, which has dramatically changed the way that students are being educated, they're learning, and they're coming into the field. So we have to really think critically, which is going to be a major theme that I'll talk about amongst my 5 themes that I'm touching on today in this presentation. But we need to think critically about the context of the world we live in right now. And I think Sakshi and the 2 other presentations today will delve a little more deeply into some of these examples. But for example, university is no longer free. I constantly hear people giving advice how they joined archaeology in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And that lifestyle and that way of coming into archaeology is just not realistic anymore, because things like university cost money. Driving licenses are more difficult to obtain with 6-month backlogs after COVID. An important thing that I'll touch on is that volunteering is no longer a viable career pathway into archaeology. And I know that's a very difficult one to touch on, because so many people in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even in the early 2000s came through volunteering as a pathway into a professional career. And a lot of that isn't possible because of housing and renting requirements, which are becoming more and more strict. And also things like sustainability, which are becoming a higher priority for everyone, but also putting a larger burden on job seekers to change the way that we're thinking about getting jobs. So for every one of these slides and themes, I'm going to add a do to some of these don'ts that I'm talking about. So for life changes, do take time to talk to current students, talk to job seekers, talk to early career archaeologists, and understand the limitations and issues that they're currently facing. And understand that sometimes less is better, and sometimes it's better to say nothing at all. Personal experience, like I've just been saying, is not always relevant. And it's really difficult for job seekers and early career archaeologists to be given advice that they just can't understand, that they'll never experience, and that they simply cannot relate to. So try to think critically about what it is that you're actually saying to them. But also, very importantly, if you're not involved with hiring, if you don't make the decisions and you're not in a position where you're making the decisions, don't make assumptions about hiring and give that advice to job seekers. I know a lot of early career and a lot of mid-career archaeologists want to help people, want to mentor them into positions and into a career. But if you don't actually know the facts and understand how that process works, try not to give advice on those issues. So if you don't know whether your company is hiring, don't say that they are. If you're not involved in the process, don't list out what your ideal skill sets, what your ideal archaeologist looks like. If you don't know exactly what your supervisors, what HR, what your bosses want in a job specification, don't specify it to students, whether or not you know it. And the same goes if you're not familiar with the process, don't give advice on it. If you've never gone through the CFA accreditation process, if you've never gone through visa applications or sponsorship, and you don't understand how it works, don't try and fill in the gaps. Don't try and make something up, because in the end, it really hurts the entire process of advice giving. So the do for this slide is do speak up if someone is saying something that is incorrect. Too often, people will just sit silently by and allow people to make assumptions and spread rumors and misconceptions that are just not true. So do stand up, do talk, and don't be a bystander. And that's something that I'm going to touch on a lot in this, well, the few minutes that I have left. But do say something if you know that something is wrong. And then part of reading the room. Too often we see in these workshops and advice panels that people aren't really communicating effectively. It's too much of someone talking down from a position of power to someone who's more vulnerable. So many students, early career archaeologists, and job seekers know what needs to be done, but they simply cannot find a job that fits their lifestyle or fits their limitations. So if someone comes to you and says, I've looked at 40 different jobs and I can't find any that work for me, don't tell them that there are more jobs out there. Don't tell them to just keep on applying, keep on being positive and working towards it. Try to talk to them and understand what the limitations are that they're experiencing, what they need to do to find a job, and how you might be able to help them. I think Sakshi is going to touch on this with intersectionality and understanding some of the limitations that people face. But the do's is that do ask for help and tell people that you might not know what you're talking about if you're advising. It's perfectly fine to be honest and to be open and to be clear when you're communicating with people. If someone comes to you and asks you for help with visas, don't just make something up, like I said before. Tell them that you might not know and tell them that you can get them in touch with someone that can give them the advice and help that they need. Because if we lie about archaeology, which so many of us often do, just trying to be positive and just trying to hide a lot of the nitty-gritty details, it hurts us in the end, because people make decisions that are not what the reality is after being told that it is something completely different. And that hurts all of us. And another big thing, which I think some of the presenters later will touch on more, is that volunteering and free resources are no longer a pathway to professional careers. Volunteering is not professional experience, it's volunteering. Otherwise, it would be called professional experience. More and more job seekers and early career archaeologists are finding that volunteering doesn't make a difference in the job seeking experience. In a lot of cases, companies are switching to online portals, which don't even allow volunteer work to be provided as evidence of experience. But more importantly, volunteering doesn't pay the bills. And expecting students and young professionals and early career archaeologists to volunteer to get professional experience is simply exploitation. It's unpaid work for people who should be doing something that is paid and getting professional experience. The same goes for free resources. Free resources are not evidence of experience. I can't put Wikipedia on my CV as evidence of knowing about the Roman Empire. So suggesting free resources as evidence of experience or ways to get more experience is not helpful. So don't suggest a free resource or something unless it can go on the CV. Also, don't suggest something that is easily searchable that really is unhelpful. And these types of things put a lot of burden on the job seeker, on early career archaeologists, to try and figure out on their own how to go about navigating these things when it's not something that they should really be worrying about. So do suggest resources, courses, and workshops, things like CIFA CPD opportunities, things at universities that are official records that you can put on your CV as evidence of experience, as evidence of professional work. And finally, just communication and education is the most important. So these are all generally dues that we've come up with that are helpful to early career archaeologists and job seekers. Providing practical support and help is key. One of the biggest things that I see a lot is resume and CV building. These are areas that people desperately need help in, along with covering letters. People desperately need help to understand how to build and how to develop their CV. So providing that is a huge opportunity for early career archaeologists to get involved with people wanting to give advice. Support and walkthrough for applications. Simply sending someone to a free resource and a guide saying, check out how to apply for visas on this website is not really helpful. It's a really difficult and complicated process. And having someone who will mentor you and help you through that process is really a key issue. And again, mentoring and networking is one of the most important aspects of all of this. Too much of archaeology is informal, and unfortunately, it's about who you know in the discipline. And until that changes, we need to be working on mentoring and networking with our students, with our early career archaeologists, and with job seekers to help them get into a position where they can get the skills and get the connections that they need to get a job. And most importantly, plan out advice. Giving advice isn't something that you can wing. It's something that you need to prepare for, that you need to educate and communicate to do properly. So don't just show up at a panel or show up at an event and expect to be able to communicate solely on your experience, because it's likely that it's not relevant anymore. So the goal of this whole presentation is to try and get people to think critically, think differently, and understand that there are a lot of limitations, which people will be talking about later today, and understanding that we need to change the way that we provide advice to job seekers. And the final point that I want to make is that we need to desperately try to get those who are in a decision-making position and those who are making the final decisions into the room to have these discussions with us and with early career archaeologists and job seekers. I know it's fantastic that we have so many early career archaeologists and mid-career archaeologists who are involved in these things, but there's a very clear gap in this entire process, which is those who are making final decisions and making all of the decisions that we need to be involved in this process. So I'll now pass it over to Sakshi, and she can take it away from there.
Okay, hi. I'm just gonna stop sharing my presentation. Can everyone see the slides?
We can. You're in presentation mode, if, as in,
Okay.
yes, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sort of just gonna kind of pick up from what Mike has said, and it's a bit more specific, but it is gonna draw upon a lot of points that Mike has mentioned before, but with a bit more detail on certain points. So the few things that are specific to this presentation that will involve is the idea of luck and toxic positivity. And equality, equity, and parity, and the differences between these that are important to note when giving out advice, and the importance of conversations. So to begin with luck, a lot of the advice that archaeologists give to early career archaeologists is like include statements of luck playing a part, that, oh, I got lucky that a job came up, or I got this job, or I got lucky with getting a mentor, and it did not, like, you did not get lucky. Like, recognize your own hard work, your own struggles, your own dedication and efforts. Like, how many jobs did you apply to? How long did you wait for what you wanted? How long did you wait to hear back from jobs? How stressful was the process for you? What did your CV look like? And how did you feel when you were rejected from different jobs and when you were accepted? And how were the different processes? And also think about your mentors. Like, how did you communicate with people in the industry? What did they praise you about? What were the good points? What were the compliments? What are things that early career archaeologists should work on in terms of communicating with people, building up their network, building up their skill set? So don't dismiss your own work. And this goes into the toxic positivity part as well, because don't, like, if you're recognizing your own struggles and recognizing that you worked hard, you're less likely to go on to telling people to just be positive and that something will come up. Because this is the idea of toxic positivity. Honesty is key. And while the idea of and the advice of stay positive almost always comes from people who really do mean well, and it's a lot of the advice is usually stay positive, have a positive attitude, or don't complain about this and everything happens for a reason, etc. It's very rarely useful, and it's often potentially harmful to the individuals because it impacts someone's mental health. Even the luck aspect, it affects someone's mental health. For instance, if they're not coming up with things, it makes them, it like evokes a feeling of, why am I so unlucky? And it can really become extremely discouraging and demotivating and really send people down a spiral. Especially, we'll come to this later, but when you come into intersectionality and equity and equality, these are things that add up onto mental health issues, especially in the workplace. And the idea of, there's a difference between having a positive attitude and the advice that you just need to have a positive attitude without being able to understand the negative feelings or the difficulties that an early career archaeologist is having, because they often get pushed aside as, oh yeah, we struggled as well, so you just have to struggle as well. Or like, a lot of the times that Mike and I have been in events, we've heard, yeah, but when we started in our like archaeology, the salary was 16K. Now it's 25 or 26 or 27. Like, there's a huge gap. But you forget that, like Mike said, that life changes. That massive increase, like, while on paper looks humongous, but in reality means nothing to people, because the inflation in just the last 2 years means that even that massive increase cannot cover your bills, your rent, your anything. And you definitely cannot save, you cannot pay for your own degrees, you cannot do anything with that money, and the amount you can take home is pretty much close to nothing unless you're really skimping out. And if you think about it, the last the last few the last couple of years, students were not using heating, barely using heating, just to get past, like get through. So please don't tell someone that they need to sacrifice things, or compromise on things, and just have to push through the struggles to establish a not so sustainable career, because we know there's issues with sustainability in archaeology, and that's a whole other minefield. And so the do here is that our goal really should be to improve the industry. It should be that if we have struggled, that we should work on it so that other people don't have to face the struggles we did. And that you should really encourage early career archaeologists to display and to talk about the negative emotions, to talk about the issues that they're feeling as well, so that they can continue having the positive attitude they need. And now, equality, equity, and parity. I know it's something we all really should know, and a lot of people will know this, but oftentimes it's forgotten what it actually means in a workplace. Equality and equity are very different things. And I equality means giving everyone the same resources, and but irrespective of bias and everything. But equity means understanding that different people have different circumstances, and everyone's not on a level playing field, and giving them different amounts of resources that they need to come to get to the same level playing field and to get the opportunities that they need. And this really needs a recognition of intersectionality. We need to understand intersectionality when it comes into the workplace, because as ideas, people tend to understand them outside of the workplace, but kind of forget to apply them into the careers advice that are given, because it falls into a lot of the times, like Micah said, there's an idea of advice that's given that is one size fits all, but it doesn't work like that. We all have varying degrees of difficulties due to systemic and ingrained issues. For instance, for international workers, there's problems of visas, and that's a good example of a lack of equity, because there's different housing requirements and contract length issues, and oftentimes they have different issues with socioeconomic backgrounds as well. For instance, university costs 3 times more for international students. And international students cannot take rolling contracts. They need a minimum of a year contract to get a visa that works. And they need a minimum of 1 year contract to be able to pay rent. And there's a lot of steps and admin that international students need to do to get through this. And again, these are all things that have negative impact on people, and we need to be cognizant of these. Now, my last point is about the conversations. Please engage with the people you are giving advice to. Understand their individual circumstances. Provide holistic advice that will be beneficial to them. And if you don't know something, that is okay, but don't stop there. Go out there, educate yourself about the topic, so next time it comes up in conversations, you are prepared. And this means that it's not one size fits all. You need to cater your advice to the people you are talking to, because one size does not fit all. And also, when we have these conversations in a lot of events, it often gets difficult and awkward, and a lot of people get defensive and dismissive, and oftentimes rude to early career archaeologists with the idea that they are being too radical and do not want to struggle. And this is not okay. You need to deal with the difficulties and the awkwardness of conversations and learn from them. If you expect to be treated with respect and you want to be believed for what you say, you have to do the same for early career archaeologists. You need to understand that they know a bit more about what they are experiencing currently. So do not assume that they don't know what they're talking about just because they've just started in the field. And again, Mike has already mentioned this, do not be a bystander. And the last point I really want to highlight is this has happened in a lot of events that I have been in, Mike has been in, and a lot of early career archaeologists have been in, it's that it's always the minority groups that are constantly having to explain their situations or the problems of the current climate to everyone. And that is not okay. A lot of the people know what the problems are, and they should be talking about them as well. And a really different example of this is that you shouldn't expect people of color to constantly talk to you and explain race and racism to you. And that's the same here. You shouldn't, because it's draining and it takes a toll on those people. And so this is another important thing. And yeah. And the last point I will mention is that a lot of careers advice and jobs and things like this include bringing up, a lot of people say that in their advice that, yeah, we're hiring people from all backgrounds and we're diverse and etc. But again, go back to all of these points and think about this critically. Are they? Do they sponsor visas? Are they actually catering to the different backgrounds of people? Are they acknowledging intersectionality? Are they just focusing on equality, or are they actually focusing on equity? And then recognize if people of all backgrounds can actually apply for these jobs, because that's where the advice needs to change. And that's, thank you. I will stop there, otherwise I will end up in a rant.
I don't want to stop the rant, but thank you so much, Sachi and Mike, for those very powerful presentations. I've jotted down some thoughts, and I think I'd love to come back to the discussion about that, the point about self-educating rather than asking your audience to do the work all the time, I think is a really big point, and let's definitely come back to that. And I was also reflecting on the fact there's so many elements of archaeology where we adapt our practice to the audience in front of us, and yet we don't seem to do that in career advice. And I think that's a really, really big, important point that could change the dial a little bit there, maybe. So we're going to go, we've got two more speakers before we get into the discussion points and the discussion elements. And first up, we've got Corey Glover from the University of Highlands and Islands, who's going to talk about socioeconomic barriers to practical archaeological experience, among other things. So Corey, over to you.
Thank you. So I'm a fourth-year archaeology student at the University of Highlands and Islands, and I've been attending community excavations across Scotland for about 4 or 5 years. And I've spoken up about this topic quite a few times. In fact, I was at a conference a few years ago with Cara where I addressed these issues to Cara. Many professionals that I have spoken to do not realise the growing cost of studying archaeology and the lack of support funding for students. In Scotland, every university has a field archaeology module where students are expected to go and get their first taste of excavation. In 2020, it was estimated that the cost of these field schools were in the region of £2,000 and that there was no funding available. The year that we're in now, there is still no funding available that is can be used on field excavation modules. So this cost is completely footed by the student. It's a mandatory cost, and it is a cost that you must pay on top of all your other costs. So your course fees, your living costs, childcare, monthly bus passes, your university laundry services, because they are not free, your late booking fees for not handing your library books back in, car parking, because a lot of students still have to pay for car parking to go to university, your food, your utilities, unpaid time off work to attend the field schools, and money that you might send back to your parents or a Christmas present for your mum. You still have to pay all these things on top of the £2,000. On top of this, I think we can all agree that 2 weeks at a site like Nessa Brodgar is probably not going to be enough experience for you to get a role in archaeology. For some, they can turn to additional field schools, and there are additional costs, and all these costs come right back up again. For others, they try out community archaeology in the hope that they'll be provided with some useful training. Community archaeology at the moment is still an unregulated sector of archaeology. The quality of training and the career advice that you may receive is completely variable. The costs continue to increase for Scottish archaeology students. A driving licence can be upwards of £1,000, a cheap car £800. Your CITB is £35. A fellowship to Society of Antiquities is also £35 a year. Your membership to CIFA, £156 a year once you're a professional, and a CSCS card that you require to work in commercial archaeology is £36. It's been suggested that facing hindrances to these costs shows a lack of passion in archaeology, and I completely disagree with that. Route to archaeology and career advice in archaeology is inconsiderate, and outdated. A friend of mine recently tweeted that they had spent their summers working instead of doing field work, and lecturers had then asked them why they were not digging, and they found that quite disheartening. These individuals that have to work instead of doing numerous volunteer opportunities are missing out on networking and relationship building opportunities, as well as their skills development. Individuals left behind from a thriving and passionate career in archaeology are more often than not from a low-income household, female, disabled, parents of children with childcare costs, and/or minorities. I'd like to pose the question of how we can help. I'd like you to consider the path that you have had leading up to your career today, and consider if you had to start again today, how would that go? What hindrances would you face? Career advice needs to be compassionate, open-minded, and dynamic. Advice needs to be accountable. We need to hold ourselves accountable for the advice that we give, and we need to hold others accountable for the advice that they are giving. Bad advice, it leaks through student archaeologists really quickly. I will tell somebody what I've been told, and they will tell somebody else, and then through it goes. That impression can stay in your mind for several years. I have heard and received plenty of bad advice over the past 4 years, and I've also seen individuals and organisations that are working hard to diversify the field and create inclusive, cost-effective field schools, and approach this topic with empathy and desire to understand. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Corinne. I always learn so much from you when we have a chat about these various issues. I really do thank you for always sharing your thoughts. Ellie, we've got yourself next, who's also going to be talking about socioeconomic barriers to practical experience, and among other things.
Hi, thank you very much for having me here. For those of you who missed my brief introduction earlier, my name is Ellie. I am a third-year student of archaeology and Celtic civilization at the University of Glasgow. And I was just going to have a little bit of a sort of informal chat about some careers advice that I've received recently, and how useful or potentially not useful that careers advice can be, considering the barriers that can prevent us from putting that advice into action. So recently there was a BBC article written with the headline, "Working part-time at uni risks worsening inequalities, warns think tank." And it was highlighting the fact that more and more students are now having to work part-time while studying to make ends meet, and how this exacerbates inequalities between those who don't have to work while they're at uni and those who can't afford not to. If you have to work while you're at uni, you obviously have less time to devote to your studies, but also less time for social events and extracurricular activities and all the other fantastic opportunities available to students. And this really resonated with me because in archaeology, we are so often told how beneficial it is to get practical experience, which is true, but it's more difficult for those of us who have to work while studying to put that advice into practice because of our job commitments. And the article resonated with me so much that I posted it on Twitter with an accompanying message just sort of saying that low-income students who have no choice but to do paid work don't have the opportunity to gain practical experience in addition to our studies, and then we are disadvantaged by this lack of practical experience. And I expected when I shared this on Twitter that some people would disagree with me because Twitter can be quite an inflammatory platform. People tend to like to disagree with each other on Twitter, and that's fine. People are entitled to their opinions. But what surprised me actually was the number of people who responded to my tweet with very well-intentioned advice that I felt rather missed the point that I was making or trying to make. A lot of people responded with suggestions that low-income students can volunteer, that there are free placements available, you know, that you can seek out opportunities to volunteer with heritage organisations or to take part in certain, you know, free community archaeology excavations. People had lots of suggestions for free opportunities that they thought low-income students would be able to take part in. And while I really do appreciate this advice and don't mean to seem ungrateful for it, it missed the point in that voluntary placements, even if they are themselves free, are not an option for low-income students who can't afford to pass up paid work shifts to attend them. It's not so much about the cost of the placements themselves, although that can be a barrier if you have to pay to attend a placement. It's more about the lack of time available to low-income students who have work commitments that they have to prioritise. Time is money, as they say, and students who have less financial resources available to them have to work more, and they therefore have less time to devote to unpaid placements. That, to me, is the issue that people don't seem to understand. People think that the barrier to low-income students is the cost of the experience itself, and that's not, I think, the whole picture. It's the time aspect as well as the money. I think it's worth noting as well, as a little side note, though this was already touched on by Sakshi and Corey, is that recent research by the Living Wage Foundation shows that women are more likely to be struggling with the cost of living than men, and minority ethnic workers are more likely to be in low-paid, insecure work than their white counterparts. So careers advice that presents barriers for low-income students will disproportionately disadvantage students who are female or from minority ethnic backgrounds. So this advice, while very well intentioned, is sometimes unhelpful. But I don't want to sound at this point like I'm being too defeatist. I don't want people to think that I am just throwing up my hands and saying, we can't do it, it's too much to expect of us, you know, because that isn't the case. You know, when low-income students are given this advice and told to get practical experience, we will do our best to make that happen. We will try to put that advice into action. In my experience, few people are as hardworking and resourceful as those who have worked most of their lives on low incomes. So we, you know, we will try to make it happen if we can. We do understand that it is valuable to get practical experience. We appreciate the advice. We will try to make it work. But it would just be nice to have, I think, alongside the advice that we need to do as much practical experience as we can, it would be nice to also hear careers advice that feels as achievable for us as it does for our peers. And I hope that that is something that we can work towards today. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for that, Ellie. And big thanks to Ellie and Corey that were literally, I think, a couple of days ago. I contacted you last week about this. So I really appreciate you both being involved with this at last minute. And I think both you've just highlighted some really, really important points there. Ellie, I can't remember who said it on, and maybe we shouldn't say their name actually on Twitter, but there was a good phrase of it wasn't free archaeology, it was something, I can't remember what the phrase was, but it was highlighting that point.
Oh, yeah, somebody said that that sort of an excavation, you know, even if it's free, is still negative money.
That's it.
If you would otherwise be in paid work. Yeah, negative money, I thought was a really good phrase. It was a good way of sort of highlighting the issue that it's not just about the cost of the placement itself, it's about the loss of earnings that you'll incur if you have to pass up paid work to take part in free practical opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and I really, I mean, both, you know, I'd love to invite Corey and Sachi and Mike back to the sort of virtual stage so we can get into the discussion here. But I think both you and Corey in particular, just the last couple of weeks, like, I mean, Corey, you've spoken up about this before, but I think it's really important to have those conversations. If we can try and have them on Twitter, we used to, I think, be better at having them on Twitter than what happens now, but also having those thoughts in a different platform like this discussion here. And it's really important to hear those points of view. Jim, we've got your hand up. Would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, where to start? What fantastic presentations. They've really made me think. Yeah, I mean, I've made so many comments in the chat, and if people want to come back on those, with that last one, Ellie, I think it's absolutely right. I mean, and also I've forgotten who it was who gave the presentation before that. I do beg your pardon. That was
Corey.
Corey. Corey. Yeah. That was really thought-provoking too, because I remember back in the 1990s going and, you know, going and, you know, and I'm a comparatively senior professional. I'm 63 years old now, and going on to a university excavation where a mate of mine was working in a paid position, and the students there were saying, you know, this is taking me away from the shift in McDonald's that I was hoping to be working, and so I'm in financial difficulties as a result of this. And, you know, but it was a compulsory fortnight's worth of field work. They had to do it or not get their degree. And I remember thinking at the time, that's appalling. And the fact that, you know, 30 years on, we're in the same position is that well, you know, it beggars belief. To me, it beggars belief. I mean, to you, it's everyday experience. I also suggested, again, and this is about 20 years ago, I remember suggesting in one session at TAG that unpaid archaeological work is in fact scabbing. You know, you're taking work away from, you know, in the sense that you're taking work away from paid professionals by doing voluntary archaeological work. Otherwise, that archaeological work, well, either it wouldn't get done, which is probably the case, isn't it? But you know, under other circumstances, you know, you'd have to pay somebody to do it. It didn't go down well. People, surprise, surprise, people found it rather offensive. But you know, there are so many points that come out of this, aren't there? That you know, in terms of those last two presentations, universities and indeed community archaeology, and I know this is easier said than done, ought to be identifying funding so that people doing the work from which the people in charge of those excavations are going to benefit, so that those people should be recompensed.
Well, I think those are really good points there, Jim. And yeah. I think just to sort of like slightly cut into you there, because I'd love to hear from lots of people in the room here.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I could rant on this for hours.
No, not at all. It's great to hear these thoughts. But I think what we're really keen is, like, that's a massive issue, isn't it? The sort of lack of resource to support our early career archaeologists to get experience that is perceived is needed to get into the workplace. But what I suppose this session is about is how we in the sector advocate career advice, which kind of what's the word, it kind of supports those thoughts that you won't get a job in archaeology unless you get X amount of practical experience.
It's a massive catch-22, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'd love to bring Sachi in here with this because you've got your hand up there. So let's hear from some other people.
I have things to say about what Sachi has said as well, which I, whose presentation also I found
all the speakers smart, and that's the thing. We're all going to learn so much. Hopefully, we're all going to come away from the session learning so much and thinking differently. Sachi, sorry, I'm talking over you.
No, that's okay. Just to talk about the funding aspect and the free work bit that even Jim just touched upon and everyone before has touched upon. I was in a recent conversation with someone that I will not name, and it was talking about free work, and they were talking to me about working and wanting to do this massive project that would actually be really good in the long run, but they mentioned that it would all be volunteering based. And it was a lot of work. And then they also spoke to me about wanting to change the narrative and being extremely keen on changing the narrative and having voices like ours, like our early careers voices being put into places and speaking up and helping change the narrative. But then the other point that they mentioned was that we all know that a large amount of the demographic in archaeology is like old white men, and the individual mentioned that how they still need to appease that demographic, so they're not going to completely change it. And I think that's where the problem comes in, that everybody, obviously they're talking about funding and things like this, and it's to a certain extent I can understand that, but I think that's where the problem comes in, because we're still stuck trying to appease a demographic that we're not looking at the current state of events. We don't recognize that if we change the narrative, we might attract other sources of fundings, other external companies that might want to invest their time with archaeological units and academia and institutes to work with us and provide more funding that can help pay the people for doing work.
No, thank you very much for sharing that. And I think
can I just say, I'm an old white man and no one's asked me whether I want to be appeased, and I certainly don't. But the fact that you heard that, Ellie, the fact that you heard that, Sasha, that's an appalling state of affairs. And if you want to talk to me offline about who said that and about whom they were talking, I'm sure
there's positive outcomes that can come from this session without naming names.
Let's out them. Let's out them.
Not at this session. Thank you.
If it's true, no one's going to get into trouble.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim, for that. But I'm just going to request that we don't name names on this session as chair, but we can follow up these concerns. Mike, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to touch a little bit on what Sakshi said and bring it back to one of my points in my PowerPoint was that sometimes less is better, and in a lot of cases in archaeology, I think that so many of us try to do a little bit too much, and oftentimes we try and take on positions that we're not really knowledgeable or where we don't really have the experience to be in those positions, particularly in a lot of leadership positions for our organizations. So I think it's really important to be open and to be able to allow other people to fill those gaps where someone might not be so experienced, and potentially look outside of archaeology to bring people into the discipline who know how to run businesses, who can find us the funding that we need, who understand a lot of the issues that we're trying to face, and can help us get there without having to do it all of ourselves, which I think we see far too often.
Yeah, and I think when you were talking with your presentation, I've got sort of like, I've been writing down notes from what you're saying and then some thoughts, and it just reflecting on that, the idea that there's a thing of, there's about recruiting in your own image. And I think that really feeds into this conversation here, in that when you're recruiting in your own image, that feeds into your career advice. And I think there's a more kind of seeps in. I don't think influences or impacts, it's too positive a word to really sort of describe what I'm saying there. But we have, if we're really serious about changing the diversity and changing who we are as a profession, that starts at career advice and starts like, just kind of throwing your career journey out the door, really, and thinking, reflecting about who's in front of you and how that should influence what you're saying.
And I think that's another really important part, is that so many positions that I see now are kind of based on that, exactly what you said, in their own image, where people are expected to come into a role, but then have a dozen other duties that they have to take care of as part of that role. So I know in one of our workshops we did, where people were talking about how to become a specialist and get specialist jobs. One of the things that they said was, well, make yourself valuable by doing social media, or make yourself valuable by volunteering or doing all of these other things to help out. But that's not really realistic anymore. We can't be jacks of all trades doing everything all the time. And particularly when we're doing it for low pay. And also, like Ori said, we're also having to pay for all of our own things. And doing extra work. And that's what Ellie said, is that you're doing all of this extra work and you're losing out on time, you're losing out on opportunities, and it's just getting worse and worse. So I think that's a really key point that we have to think about, is that, when we give advice, we can't be expecting people to do more than what they should be expected to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. I think, Sachi, you've got your hand up.
Just two kind of small points touching base on things that have been said, and Kate's comment in the chat as well about the disconnect between the employer's views and the potential employees. I'd really like to talk about this, because I think this about them struggling to recruit, because I think this kind of comes in from the idea that, if you think about this, I'm going to specifically talk about commercial units here. Just over this summer and over the last year, many units let go of hundreds of employees. So if you're thinking about struggling to recruit, maybe think like units and employers need to think about sustaining their employees, retaining their employees. Because how are they meant to recruit people if all the potential recruits, they are just worried about being fired in 6 months' time? And also, there are many people waiting for jobs, and I know many people that get rejections every single day. So it's really not about struggling to recruit. It's about having unnecessary requirements in your applications. Like, for the main one I can think about is the driving license. I can never find any reason to justify having a driving license, at least not at the basic levels of the jobs. It's just not reasonable to have it as a mandatory requirement. So I really don't think it's necessarily about communication. I think it's about people getting realistic and employers finally acknowledging the issues instead of going away from them every time. And the other thing I would like to mention is accountability, that people really, okay, Cara, I agree with you. Okay, sure, we won't name names here, but I really do think it is extremely, extremely important to hold people to their words and their actions. If we don't call people out for what they're saying, for what they're doing, they get to go away with doing and saying whatever they are doing. And a lot of the times this can include discrimination, breaking, and it can include a lot of different things. And I think for these things, it's really important to be held accountable, especially because these conversations tend to happen where there's a power imbalance. For instance, that person would never have spoken to an old white man about appeasing them. It happened to me, where I'm not in a position to argue against them. And there's a power dynamic there that is not really acknowledged. So I think it's really important to be able to call out these people and to have other people who are in a position of power to hold them accountable. And the last thing is that I know I spoke about luck, and removing luck out of the equation, but the one thing that we should recognize is privilege. And this comes in the points of intersectionality that Corey and Ellie have talked a lot about, is employers and people going through applications really need to recognize their privilege, and people giving careers advice really need to recognize their privilege before giving anything forward.
Yeah, and I would hope people reflect on their privilege, any aspect of their archaeological practice, but I think particularly when they're giving career advice or they're hiring, people need to self-educate, they really do. And myself included, don't get me wrong, it's career advice should evolve as any element of our practice. It shouldn't ever stay static. And if we can always learn and improve, that's a good thing. Corey.
Just to touch on some of their topics, I do think it's really interesting. I've seen in the comments that I've shocked quite a number of you listening to some of the figures involved in being a student and some of the costs that you have to pay upon graduation just to enter a commercial job. And as you can imagine, it's quite disheartening to then go into a commercial role where you're asked to, your contract is up by Christmas, you're then asked to reapply in the new year. It's sort of subject to how many contracts they can get in. It's a really disheartening and the rate of pay, this concept of negative money, every student upon graduation is in negative money. They've paid £2,000 for their field school for their 2 weeks beginner, which isn't even enough. So they've probably paid a lot more in time and in monetary value. And I think that we should be talking about, I think we need to be careful, but we do need to have a conversation about how we do call out these people. As Sachin, I hope I said that correct. As we were talking there, how it's not possible for myself or some of the other members in this group here to be able to call out individuals about their bad advice. How do we get around that? How do we start calling out their bad advice? I think, it goes back to how we hold ourselves accountable. I appreciate Jim's comments there, that to email him and things like that. But personally, there'll be people who don't feel that is safe, and that's not an option, and that is not something that we should be doing. We should be talking about, on the whole, as an industry, how peers at the same level should be able to call out this behaviour.
Thanks, Corey. We're running into our break time now. I know Jim and Mike have got your hands up, but I wonder if you could save those points for the later discussion, if that's possible. I did just want to address there's 2 points here in the comments chat about the phrase old white man and men, and I think that's a good point that's being used quite a lot today. And I suppose by my interpretation of this is that the predominant demographic that occupies the upper levels of our archaeological sector, our professional sector, are quite a narrow demographic. But perhaps going forward, we could rethink about the phrase that we're using there and talk, potentially, if everyone's agreeable, we talk more about the narrow demographics that occupy the top of our profession and are in the decision-making sections. But we're happy to talk further about that either outside the session, or we can discuss further in the discussion section, if that's okay.
Surely that section is old white men, Cara.
Pardon?
I mean, surely those people who are in the upper echelons of our profession, in the position to change any of this, are old white men. I mean, I'm struggling to. I mean, Janet Miller was the only CEO, and she's no longer CEO at Mola. I can't think.
Jim, I'm just going to cut over you there, if that's okay, because we are running into our break. We'll still have 10 minutes, if that's okay. But I think it's more about just how we're phrasing and talking about some of these issues. And I think that's what, if we could, we want to keep this conversation respectful. And I think if we could talk about, use different language and term for that element of our sector, I think that would be helpful, if that would be okay with everyone going forward. But I'd like to sort of call a break now, if I can. And we will come back at 11:17, which is a bit of an odd time to start, but let's have a clear 10 minutes break. Please step away from your laptop, get a cup of tea, have a proper digital break, and we'll come back to this at 11:17. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you managed to get a digital screen break. And a cup of tea or a biscuit, and ready for the second part of this session. So we're now going to go to Jane Miller from Archaeology Scotland, who's going to talk about their new scheme, Archaeology Ambassadors. So over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Cara. Thanks. I don't quite know where to start now, because I had my presentation all done and then I've just listened to all this morning's speakers, and it was, I don't know whether I'm just completely raging or really upset or all of the above. I think all of the above. So yeah, really interesting. So we have set up a scheme called Archaeology Ambassadors, which is loosely based on the STEM Ambassadors model, which schools are very familiar with. So it's about archaeologists, professional archaeologists going into schools and talking about their career, the skills they use, and doing kind of workshops with the young people, the children and young people. So I will talk a little bit about that, but I was just listening to some of the conversations, you know, things about calling out and what we do around that. And for my sanity, I often go to museum as muck and fair museum jobs, as they're both, I don't know, I'll put links in the chat. I'm sure everybody's aware of them, but they are people who are kind of, you know, fighting a little bit that corner, not specifically for archaeology. My background before was in museums, but I think they're starting to do some good work at just highlighting some of the issues that people are facing in the sector. But anyway, to focus on what I'm meant to be talking about. So our Archaeology Ambassador scheme, I know when I first was talking about this, there were one or two people saying, oh, well, there's lots of retired archaeologists out there who love going into schools and speaking to the kids. And that didn't sit right with me. So I was glad to see that was one of Michael's do's, was speak to early career archaeologists. And that's really what we've done. So I'm just going to hopefully share my screen, share my PowerPoint. Yeah. It's a wee bit slow. Cara, I presume you'll shout at me if you can't see it.
I'm here ready to.
And can you see that? You see a picture? Great. Yeah, so Archaeology Ambassadors. So I'm Jane, I work for Archaeology Scotland. So I'll just talk a little bit about the background to Archaeology Ambassadors and how the project will work. So I work for Archaeology Scotland. Some of you will know, some of you may not know that we're an educational charity working with communities, schools, young people across Scotland, encouraging people to get involved in archaeology, to explore their local heritage. And sometimes this does sort of veer into sort of giving careers advice and speaking to young people about becoming archaeologists. We are also the lead body for Aim 4 of Scotland's archaeology strategy, and Aim 4 is all around encouraging greater engagement. And Aim 4 is made up of 3 strands. There is engagement, presentation, and education. And focusing on the education side of this, we've set up the Archaeology and Learning Working Group, who kind of support and steer our delivery of the education strand of Aim 4. So, for example, they commissioned a report about archaeological learning, the benefits and impact of archaeology used as a tool for learning in different education settings. They also support us to deliver annual CPD sessions for educators. So every year we do an Archaeology in Schools online webinar for educators with a different theme each time. And they help us with the Heritage Resources portal. So the Resources portal is it's a website where we gather heritage learning resources from across Scotland and we share them freely on this website. So you can go there and find resources about the Romans or resources about Culloden or whatever it is. So it's all on there and it's free to access. And then on to Archaeology Ambassadors, this is also part of our Aim 4 work. So this is, as I said before, loosely based on the STEM Ambassador scheme, which is huge and seems to work very well. It's for professional scientists to go into schools and work with school groups. But what we were seeing was a need for careers advice. There was a lot more interest from schools in careers advice and talks. So we thought maybe an ambassador scheme for archaeology, although it's a bit of a, I'm not sure about the name, but it does mean that schools know what we mean when we say archaeology ambassadors. They think, oh yeah, like STEM ambassadors or geography ambassadors, whichever scheme they're used to. So introducing the scheme, really, a few years ago, we found that through developing the young workforce in Scotland, it's the Scottish Government's youth employment strategy to better prepare young people for the world of work. And after that strategy came in, we noticed we had increased requests from schools for careers talks and activities. There was also a lot more awareness in schools about skills development and emphasis on skills development and the recognition of those skills. So young people realised what skills they were developing and how useful they were. But also as a sector ourselves, we acknowledge that we need to improve diversity within the heritage sector. We need to work on that. So where I'm coming from all this is the kind of get them young approach. So we work a lot with primary schools and secondary schools. So we are getting young people at the stage when they're starting to think about their careers, think about what they might want to do. So the aim of the Ambassadors programme is to raise awareness of archaeology as a career and the range of roles that are in the sector, to share what it's like to actually work in archaeology and the skills required. So again, this is why we want to get sort of early careers professionals involved. And to encourage young people to think that a career in archaeology could be for them. It's not something stuffy and elitist, although some of you might argue against that, but potentially it should be for them. And through the scheme, we can build capacity in the sector to deliver this type of authentic careers advice. So the way it is we've got funding to run a pilot project, and delivery of the pilot will sort of run to the end of next year, and then we'll do some evaluation after that. We've currently got 12 archaeology ambassadors in the pilot project, and we have mainly gone to development-led archaeology sector and asked for early careers staff to be involved. So this has to be sustainable. This can't just be people doing it on a voluntary basis to get a bit of nice experience. This has to be funded by the employer. They have to pay expenses. They have to pay for the time that's needed to do the training, to be part of the scheme, and then to go out and deliver the workshops. And Archaeology Scotland, so we ourselves, we offer support and training to the ambassadors. We promote the scheme to schools and connect ambassadors to local schools. And some of the training will be directly about careers messaging. So we're not saying, well, if you want to go into archaeology, you have to do lots of work for nothing, you have to get lots of experience, you know, you have to be away from home for years on end, you know, you'll never get a mortgage, you know, it's not that old kind of advice. We want to give proper careers advice, not blindly positive, obviously, but equally not just retelling those old stories, I guess. And then the final stage of it is the ambassadors themselves will go out and deliver short archaeology workshops or career sessions in schools. And so kind of the idea is to show children and young people that whatever they're interested in, archaeology potentially could be for them. So, you know, classically, if they're interested in social subjects, social studies, history and geography, that's where we would normally see people come from. But equally, if you've got a passion for languages or maths or sciences, technology, expressive arts, even RME, you know, archaeology touches on everything. It's an incredible interdisciplinary subject. So we don't want to think just because you're not studying history, you can't go into archaeology. It potentially could be for you. So that's kind of what the scheme is all about. And we've got 12 ambassadors. We had our first startup meeting 2 weeks ago. The next sessions will be about giving them the training and support that they need before they start going out to schools to work in schools. But I'm very, very conscious after listening to you all speak this morning, the messaging we give has to be right. And we have to work with our early careers ambassadors to make sure that we're sort of saying the same thing in a way, but you know, getting that message out there and getting it right is so important. So that's just a really, really brief overview of this scheme, but I'm happy to take anybody's questions about it.
Thank you so much, Jane. I can't wait to see this project progress and hear the learning points from it. Has anyone got any direct questions for Jane here? Or we can pick up some points, you know, as opportunities perhaps in the main discussion. Okay, well, we'll definitely come back to it, I think, in the main discussion. Thank you so much, Jane, for that. I'm going to just share a presentation now of a project CIFA has been involved with. It's called the Improving Access Project, and it's being facilitated by Historic Environment Scotland. CIFA and CIFA sits on the steering group. Archaeology Scotland is involved with some key strands of this as well. And it's looking at the barriers to accessing heritage careers, and some of the preliminary results that have come out, I suppose, really prove or provide data for a lot of the issues that we're talking about today. So I've got a recorded presentation now from Ma, and I will attempt to share it. Okay. Let's see. Sorry. Sorry, every time I touch my screen, it clearly pauses it. So I'm just going to.
Cara, I don't think we can hear the sound if it's supposed to be sound on it.
There is. Can no one hear the sound?
No. Have you shared your, you can do a setting, can't you, to share your microphone?
Sound.
That's it, sound.
Thank you so much. I'll go back to the beginning. Hang on.
Approach in Scotland.
That works.
The Improving Access project. The Improving Access project wants to embed practice to support real long-term sustainable change in the historic environment sector. And during this initial phase, which we are dubbing the Explore phase, we want to identify the barriers that people face when entering the sector and how we can develop a sector-wide approach in Scotland that will improve access to the workforce. In particular, we're looking to understand what employment practices and systemic sector beliefs are excluding people from the sector's workforce in Scotland, and how we can change them in order to have a more diverse and inclusive sector, which is actually reflective of the communities it works with. We're hoping that once we've got all of this information, we can produce a report with recommendations, and from that, create an action plan for delivery that help us move action forward. We have 4 key questions we're using to guide our research. So essentially, we want to find out what activity is currently happening in Scotland's regions to improve access to heritage careers. How accessible are these opportunities? How well do they align to create clear, consistent career pathways? And most importantly, how aware are people that these opportunities exist and that these pathways exist? We also want to know what the current and past learner experience is, and this includes university graduates, trainees, apprentices, fellows, interns, etc. We want to know what the experiences and perceptions from individuals that are least wanting to engage with the historic environment sector are, and why they are like that. What is keeping them from wanting to engage with the historic environment sector? And we also want to know how we can support organizations in the future so that we make sure they can develop and deliver accessible opportunities for people to access them. We want to understand the needs of the sector too. Our methodology for this initial exploration phase of the project is to host focus groups with different people from the public. So we want to host a total of 6 exploration focus groups during which we explore the different barriers that people have faced when trying to engage with the historic environment sector or when trying to enter the workforce in the sector. And then we also want to have 5 co-creation focus groups in which people tell us what in their minds would be the most accessible workforce in the sector. So that could cover things like employability practices, interviewing practices, work-based learning opportunity design, what is working, what is not, what they would like to see. The groups that we have been engaging with, and also some groups that we want to engage with but haven't had the chance to yet, are communities that have been historically marginalized from entering the heritage sector. And we have turned to West of Scotland Regional Equality Council for this. People who want to enter the heritage sector but have not secured a paid role yet. Alumni of work-based learning programs, so that would be traineeships, internships, apprenticeships, craft fellowships. We've had a very varied group of people from across the whole historic environment sector attend our focus groups. And we've also talked to university graduates working in the heritage sector. And we want to approach people working in the heritage sector with disabilities, but we haven't been able to host that focus group yet. So far, we have undertaken 4 focus groups with the help of WestRec and Arc of Inclusion as our facilitators. And we have seen some issues cropping up across these 4 groups. There seem to be issues with representation. People don't see themselves represented in exhibitions, heritage institutions, collections, or stories told, and therefore they don't feel the need to engage with the sector. But on an employment level, they also don't see themselves represented in the staff, the volunteers, or the trustees boards. So they also don't feel like they should even be applying to these roles because no one in the institutions will understand their lived experience. There is a lack of funding in the sector, which is leading to less roles and to instability around the roles that do exist. There's also short-term contracts, which not everyone can afford to go into, and part-time contracts are a similar issue. which lead people to choose other sectors which offer more stability. The lack of feedback. People tend to be discouraged after not receiving feedback on unsuccessful job applications. Inaccessible pathways into the sector. People cannot afford to volunteer to gather experience for a variety of reasons, including caring responsibilities, socioeconomic reasons, and time as well. People cannot always afford to go through the university route, which at the moment in Scotland is the main route to go into archaeology. There's also the suggestion that we are not advertising our vacancies widely enough. So people in the focus group suggested that we distribute our vacancy ads more widely, specifically targeting different communities through networks, community centres, places of worship, or stores, among others. There's also a need for awareness, and this is a twofold point. It includes the need to raise awareness around heritage careers and pathways into the sector, specifically among minority ethnic communities, but it also includes the need to raise awareness among interviewers of different cultural practices and customs. So what does this mean? Volunteering is not accessible to everyone, so we should find other advice for people on how to gather the necessary experience to break into the sector. Not everyone has the time or the economic means to volunteer, and the same goes for summer schools. Not everyone has the time or the economic means, even when they are not paid for. We need to find different ways into the sector, and that doesn't necessarily just apply to volunteering and to gathering experience. It also applies to learning. Not everyone can afford to go to university, and we need to find other ways in. For example, apprenticeships or internships, fellowships, things of the sort that can help us break barriers, especially socioeconomic barriers. And we need to re-examine our marketing strategies. This actually applies on a wide variety of points. So we need to examine, who do we reach out to? Are we actually reaching out to all of the communities out there that could go into the sector? Are we reaching out to people when they are young enough and when they are considering what their career opportunities could be? Or are we only reaching out to people that are interested in the sector? And how are we reaching out to them? Are we going through the same channels every time? Should we reach out through different networks? Should we go through specific networks such as WestRec or LGBT Youth Scotland networks? Or should we go through community groups? And what do we tell them once we reach out to them? Are we giving the correct messages? Are we making sure that people are aware of what the pathways are, that they are clear, that they are accessible? Again, the current system and the current pathway into the sector is not always accessible to everyone. So are we making sure that we make clear there's different ways, alternative ways to go in, that not everyone needs to come in through a university degree, that not everyone needs to do volunteering or go into short-term contracts? So what is next? We are hoping, or the Improving Access Group is hoping, we can get the learning from this and add it into our group action plan. We want to hold a national symposium in the spring of next year, in which we want to engage with different employers and hopefully distill some actions that we can take forward. We want to also hold consultation events with different employers across the sector to know how we can best implement these ideas and what kind of support they would need from us in order to test them out. And we want to continue disseminating our findings and our learning. Thank you very much for listening to me today. As I mentioned, these are very preliminary results. So we will have more information later down the line. There's plenty of opportunity to engage and to keep updated with this. If you have any questions or comments, I'm afraid I'm not there right now. So please feel free to email them to me. You will find my email in the screen right now. I hope you enjoy the rest of your presentations and the rest of your day.
Brilliant. Thanks for bearing with us there with the tech hiccups at the start. And what we'll make sure is that we'll look at if we can upload Mar's presentation to the Shed page for this session, so you can catch the start of it as well. But we'll just move swiftly on to Anna, my colleague Anna Welsh, who's going to talk about some of the career resources on our website. Over to you, Anna.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you all see the screen okay?
That looks good.
Brilliant. Just very briefly, some of you may be aware, others may not be aware, but over the last year or so, we've been putting together a careers area on the CEFA website. The careers, well, I hesitate to call it advice. I'm going to call it information. Has always been on the website, but it has sometimes been quite difficult to find. So we hope that by putting it all together in the careers kit, and if you see at the top, you can hover over the careers tab, and you've got the careers kit right underneath. And the reason that we wanted to put this together was because we answer a lot of questions with people asking for careers advice, and the questions come from people of all ages, of all backgrounds, from different places in their career. Some of them haven't started yet, and actually they also come from all over the world. So not one size fits all. And I spend a lot of time replying to individual emails with very, very individual answers, and it's quite difficult to sort of put together a list of resources and pages that will suit everybody. So a lot of the time it's about finding out what the person's individual circumstances are, whether they have a family, whether they have access to transport, where they are in the country, and then I might be able to give them some sort of meaningful information to help them on their way. So the landing page of the careers kit is really talking about who we're intending it to be for, and actually we wanted to include a lot of different types of people, so we've segmented it. So we've got an area for future archaeologists. People are not really very sure about what archaeology is. And if you click onto that page, you will find something that is quite basically talking about why you should choose it, where do we work, and that sort of thing. Going backwards, we've also got an area about that showcases people's careers. So we asked people if they would be kind enough to give us a snapshot of their career and what they do, and some case studies. I'm going to make a plea now. We are always looking for more people to come forward and tell us about what they do, and in that way we can make sure that everyone can sort of see themselves within archaeology. But we haven't got a very diverse group of case studies on there at the moment, and it would be fantastic if anybody fancied doing some more to add to them. I particularly wanted to do a group for an area for teachers, and as Jane has explained, about STEM subjects, or even STEAM subjects now, because some people put arts in. We can fit into any areas of that, and really I wanted teachers to appreciate that. So I put something on, and it's actually quite similar but nuanced, and it's similar to our area for people who want to become an archaeologist. It's similar to our area for careers advice professionals. It's just written in a slightly different way, so that if you are a teacher, you'll find exactly the sort of thing you want to know about. And hopefully that'll mean that people at school are getting information that's nearer to what we would consider accurate, rather than relying on things that are perhaps 30, 40, 50 years out of date. So again, we have an area for careers advisors. We also have an area for training providers. So that's universities, that's further education. And there they can find out more about things like our approved training in CPD schemes. They can find out about NVQs. They can find out about our accredited degrees. And we also have an area for employers. And the area for employers is really one I'd really like to develop. And one of the things I'd like to be able to put on it is as well as giving them all this information about where they can find out about schemes, government schemes about employing people. They can find out about apprenticeships and traineeships and accredited degrees and NVQs, etc. They can also maybe find out how to build a good job description if they're wanting to employ people, because we know a lot of job descriptions are very formulaic, and as has been pointed out, there's a lot of things on there, such as being able to drive a car, which we might feel are a little bit extraneous for early entry jobs. The other sections that I wanted to put in were for people who were not necessarily in charge of telling people or creating jobs for archaeologists, but were for people themselves who were interested in finding careers. So, for example, we have an area on skills and training where people can find out about approved training schemes, for example, so they can find out who runs the approved training scheme. They can find out what it'll be like, and we've got something from Diggers Forum about trainees and training programs and what to expect from them, so that people actually know from people who are working in archaeology what to expect from these things. And we've got links to other areas of our website, things like continuing professional development. So, you know, what to do when you're already in a job, how do you move forward with it? And things for people who are career changers. I get a lot of inquiries from people who want to change into archaeology from other careers, and quite often it has been from voluntary opportunities that they've taken part in, and they find they're very, very interested, and it's quite difficult sometimes for them to know what to do after that. So because we're a little bit short of time, I'll stop sharing now. And if there's any questions you want to ask, please do. I've also put the link into the chat. But this, I want to just make the point, is this is the start of a careers kit. It's going to be ever changing. I would really like people's input. If you see something in there that you think, well, that's a bit out of date now, please let me know. If you think, well, I could really add a fantastic resource, then please tell me as well. We'd absolutely love to have your input into our careers kit. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I think you've got an offer there to help with some case studies there at Archaeology Intros in the chat there. So I'll let you pick that up. Brilliant. So we've now got roughly about sort of 20-25 minutes for discussion. We're going to run till 12:15, if that's okay with everybody. And just try and pick up some of the points that we've discussed today, and also maybe start to think about what could be the output from this discussion. What should be the next steps? Is this session, is this Innovation Festival session enough? Is it the job done? Or what could be the output from this session that could really actually start to change the dial with this element of our practice? I wanted to maybe start off the conversation talking about maybe recruitment practice. And we mentioned before about recruiting in your own image. But I also wanted to pick up, it was something Sachi said in our sort of pre-session conversation. Are you there, Sachi? Hi. It was something you said about application forms not quite matching up with some of the career advice that you've got, and I wondered if you wanted to elaborate on that or share some of those thoughts with the group.
Yeah, so recently I was applying for a lot of jobs in the last 3 months, and I just want to make a lot of the employers, and I don't know how many of you work here in employer-based jobs, or if this is something that can be passed on. And this is not just limited to commercial units. In fact, I don't think I applied to any commercial units. And this is that a lot of the jobs now, they don't actually require you to submit your CV and a cover letter in. It's online application forms. So you have to type in all of the data or information that you have from your CV into it. However, the volunteering experience, a lot of these application forms physically do not let you input unpaid work. So if you haven't been paid for it, you cannot put that in, because it asks for your salary, it asks for your proper employers and things as such. So if you haven't been paid, you cannot put that in. And things like this. So even though you might have volunteered, so I volunteered for some places for years, I cannot put that in. So all of this professional experience and the free resources and free things that I would have gone through, and all of that might have contributed to my experience, immediately goes away. And because you cannot put in your CV and you cannot really put in a cover letter, that all of that is immediately taken away from that. Yeah.
No, I just thought that was a really practical, obvious point that's probably not obvious to a lot of people giving out career advice, that there's not even a way for you to track that in a job application. And it's just
yeah.
it's
No,
not...
and the thing is, a lot of the times, the companies themselves giving advice don't know that their own application forms are like this, which is what it is. Sorry, I just saw a comment in the chat. And no, they are not equitable, and you cannot put in a 0 as salary. Like, trust me, I tried my hardest to incorporate everything, and it doesn't. And no, again, in the personal statement, you cannot. There are word restrictions and things as such. You genuinely cannot. Obviously, it's not universal for all applications. Some will let you add in things, but there are a lot of them that you cannot add it in.
Yeah. And I suppose there's the option, obviously, if you get to the interview process, then that's an option to bring it up then. But then there's quite a few jobs in early career positions within archaeology. You don't get an interview. You actually just, you're judged solely on that written piece of information.
Exactly.
Someone with dyslexia, that's quite a pitfall, to be judged on a sort of written bit of information right there, unless you've got access to people that can help you with your forms. So it's a barrier right there. Mike, do you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to add in a little bit on what Sakshi said, is that and what some of the comments seem to be getting at, is that I think in a lot of cases we try and find workarounds for different things that put a lot of burden on early career archaeologists and job seekers to make ends meet, or they're taking the onus of making a change. And in a lot of those cases, I think, for example, with putting volunteer work on your resume or your CV, we as early career archaeologists can take the risk of trying to change our volunteer work to look more like professional work, and then risk a negative outcome later on when the reality comes out that that is not actually professional work. It was volunteer work, or something that we were unpaid, or something that doesn't fit into what the company was looking for. And that also goes a lot for advice. I was talking to Sakshi about it, because I actually just saw that we were sent around a paid opportunity to go to talk to students, to talk about UCL, talk to students about a career in archaeology. And these types of things are really difficult, because it's putting early career people in a position where we're talking about things where we have to lie about it, or we have to talk, we have to be hypocritical about these things, because we're not able to say, yeah, when you join archaeology, you're going to be paid really well, or you'll have a great career, because a lot of us are struggling just to find good career paths that pay us a reasonable amount just to survive. So I think it's really important to think really critically about those things and the positions that we're putting early career archaeologists in, just to get them to get the experience or get the money, or get out there and get the job.
Yeah, because I think it's really interesting there's lots of, as you say, there's always a workaround. I'm sure you can always push and try and get that foot in the door or get your application top of the pile. But it's a level of privilege to be able to do that, to have the confidence to do that, to have the know-how to do that, to have been coached to do that. And I think that's where we're bringing in the sort of lack of equity right there at the start of your career, that those who have been coached and mentored to be pushy like that will get through the door. And how much talent are we losing by maybe not adapting some of those processes? But again, bringing it back to career advice, how can that reflect in our career advice? Sachi.
Hi, I'm just seeing some of the comments on the chat, and please don't take this in a wrong way, but this is the point. These are the points that I think Mike, myself, Ellie, and Corey have brought up again and again, which is that this is the disconnect that people have brought up. We're blatantly putting out that we cannot, and all of the comments in here, instead of accepting this and being like, okay, I'm going to take it further to the employers or to the organizations, are still just going around the same. Oh, like, you know, there's someone talking about, oh, if there is an opportunity, or yeah, sure, if you can. Like, we've established that we can't. Like, this is the point where you believe our words and you move on with it, and you accept that, okay, if they're talking, if we have gone through this process, we would have tried our extreme hardest to work our way around. And if we haven't been able to, it's because there hasn't been a workaround, or we haven't had the time or the opportunity or the ability to work around it. So please don't take this the wrong way. And yes, unpaid work can still be done in a professional way. So it is important to try and include. We know this is why we are constantly trying to include it, and this is why we are constantly arguing that we don't want to do volunteering work anymore, because it no longer counts. So yeah,
and I think I wanted to highlight it's having access to funding to be able to do this, and we're lucky with the Improving Access project that Mar presented. We've got external funding for that project, but participants who took part in the focus group received perhaps not an ethical organization, but received Amazon vouchers that could be used for food, groceries, and so they were paid for their time, and they were paid in a currency that wouldn't impact any additional financial support that they were getting from the state as well. And I think if we're expecting people to try and feed in, like, that's something, again, the sector needs to consider about that, is remuneration for these conversations, I think. Mike, got lots of hands up. Mike.
Yeah, I just have a short thing that I wanted to mention, that I was going to mention before, but Sakshi just reminded me about it. Is that I know it's probably something that we do without thinking, but I don't think that we should be apologizing for being provocative. And I know that Sakshi's done it. Ellie and Corey both did it in their presentations. I've done it, and Jim did it in the chat, that we had to apologize for being provocative, for calling out the demographics that and the reality of those demographics and their impact in archaeology. And I think it's important that we should kind of stop being apologetic about being provocative and calling out the issues and saying that there is something wrong, and that we need it to change. So I just want to say that, you guys shouldn't have to apologize, because these are issues that are major issues that we have to talk about, and we have to get it out there for people to hear.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Jim.
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, on that point, the reason I put it in the chat was it struck me that despite being, well, I won't use the expression, despite being from the demographic that I was, it might be that other people on this session didn't appreciate and found it disrespectful for me to use the phrase that I used, and therefore I thought I might as well say that, and I thank and I thank you for picking me up on it. I think it was Kate. Was it Kate who picked me up on it, or was it? Oh, was it you? You know, it was you, Cara. Yeah. Thank you very much. The other point that that I was going to make that that Sakshi was saying about this is the stuff that you've found, and here we are arguing with you, or some of us arguing with you. I think that's a very interesting point, and it speaks to a wider issue with archaeologists, which is that it is a job which generally attracts people on the autistic spectrum. It's in the nature of archaeology that you're interested in that people are interested in particular detail, typology, things like that, and it genuinely attracts people who are on people who are on the spectrum, but who aren't diagnosed because they're high functioning autistic. And for that reason, we find it difficult to see other people's points of view. So, and as a result, are dreadfully argumentative. So that's something that lies behind it. And when we come to talk about EDI on Friday, I think that's certainly something which we should address. Okay, I'll stop ranting and shut up now.
Not at all, no. And I look forward to our session. I'll do a bit of plug for that. We're looking at neurodiversity in archaeology on Friday morning. We'd love to see you all there. And certainly some of the barriers, I think, to employment will be coming up during that session. And I think just to I don't want to keep going on about this point. When we talked about the words that were being used before the break, my point was about inclusive language, and that's what I'm keen to sort of promote for everyone in this session. But I totally agree, Mike. Let's stop pussyfooting around these issues, and just think about the phrasing we're using. But we can't solve anything if we're not talking directly about it. And these are big issues that need to be solved. Ellie.
Yeah, it was just to say that I completely agree with what Sakshi was saying just there. And I really just want to highlight the fact that early careers archaeologists are quite often offered advice when we are in situations where we haven't actually asked for advice. And I'm not trying to say that I'm ungrateful for advice that people give me. I am grateful for it, and I do always try to listen and to take it on board. But as I recently learned when I sort of accidentally crowdfunded a lot of advice from Twitter, my original tweet I wasn't asking for people my advice. I was trying to highlight barriers that myself and other low-income students face. And the response that I hope to receive is some acknowledgement of those barriers, and for people to perhaps look at ways that these barriers could be overcome. And actually in those situations, just offering me advice that I haven't asked for is, as I say, while I'm not ungrateful for the good intentions, it's not always a helpful thing to do in the situation. So maybe people could consider, if they are about to offer somebody some advice, maybe just think a little bit about whether or not the person you're about to advise is actually asking for your advice.
I mean, I think that's advice for lots of areas of your life, isn't it? But particularly pertinent for this topic here. But yeah, and I think it goes back. There's been a couple of comments here about how not everyone is suited to give careers advice, and yet as a sector, we're often quite happy to share our career advice nuggets, and that's where it can get. I think it was Corey that mentioned about how, I think maybe Mike mentioned as well, but it's about like how one bit of career advice can actually spread through a student community and become insidious within that community. That wasn't quite your words, but that's how I felt when you were mentioning that. But Corey, you have your hand up. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, it was just to add on to what Ellie was saying there. I think both Ellie and I have been subject to criticism face to face and on Twitter. It has been suggested to us that to continue complaining about this subject, to continue discussing this subject, or advocating for a better version of what we've got, suggests that we have a lack of passion. And I think it's fair to say that everybody that's spoken on this panel today, students and early career researchers, does not lack passion. That's why we're here. We've given up our time free of charge to come along and discuss this topic. Many of us have participated in hundreds of hours of volunteer work and paid through the roof childcare costs, transport, travel, accommodation. You know, there is not a lack of passion here, and I think that it's really disheartening to have that sort of rhetoric replayed to us quite a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, it's about listening, isn't it? It's about standing back and listening, and also not thinking you're listening, but really applying your experience on the situation, because it's not relevant half the time. And that's, yeah. Sachi, you've got your hand up.
Just a couple points to add on. Like, I completely agree with everything that's been said right now. But the CIFA Careers Toolkit, that looks great. And I'm sure people have contacted Anna about it. But at the same time, at UCL, where all the Institute of Archaeology degrees are accredited, most of the people don't even know what CIFA is, even though they are all automatically enrolled into CIFA as student memberships. So that's one thing I'd like to say there, because many students don't know that that's a database they can even access, because they don't even know what CIFA does. So that's one problem there about like publicizing and marketing CIFA that needs to be done. And then the other problem with that is a lot of people that know about CIFA, particularly in commercial side of things and even in academia, don't particularly like CIFA. So they're not really promoted and put forward to students as an advice, or early career archaeologists to be like, you need to go view this base because it can be really advantageous. So I think that's another thing that's really important to look at and look into. And also, we've talked a lot about information and gathering information. And this is something I've talked about in the conference as well and at other events. And it's that we have had this information with us for the longest time. We know these. And yes, I can appreciate more studies being done and all of this, but we know what the issues are. My question that I would like to put out is, why can't this be implemented now? Why can't we have those discussions with employers and organizations now? Why do we need more information when we already have it?
Yeah. Do you think that's particularly endemic as archaeologists, we love data, so sometimes we need data in order to make change, or is it something else?
I mean, sure, maybe that's a part of it, but I think it's also a certain level of laziness and a level of avoiding the issue. And always saying that change is slow, like the idea of change is slow. And sure, it is slow, but we don't need to make it snail paced.
Yeah.
And we don't need to make it slower than it needs to be. Like, we can really pace things up, but that means we have to really start doing things.
And I totally agree. And I think so one thing, Jim, I just want to say separately that you're private messaging me thoughts, I think, for the whole chat, and I think everyone would love to see your thoughts, and I'm only seeing at the moment, so I don't know if I can repaste them. But you know, Jim's highlighted about sort of
please do.
Okay, right, brilliant. So Jim's highlighted about sort of increasing CIFA contact with universities, and that's something we certainly do where we have capacity. But also about, I think Jim's not said this, but increasing links between industry and universities as well where we can. I think one thing I want to say, we've got some examples here about forms and good practice in terms of paid opportunities, learning opportunities. But there, in every region of the UK, there's some great examples that are taking place, some great case studies. In every region of the UK, there are some employers that have some fantastic recruitment policies in place. But until it's ubiquitous in our sector, there's still something that we've got to try and change there. And I think that's why sessions like this are important, so we can start to share the good practice and try and make that mainstream rather than a regional unique aspect or an organizational unique aspect, and that's certainly something that I think needs to try and be worked on. We've got about 4 minutes left of this